Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar. I'm Jason Smith. I'm one of the managing directors and the founder of OHO Interactive. And I'm glad to have you joining us this afternoon to talk about engaging museum audiences with social media. We're going to get started in a minute or two. You'll notice a few things just to give you kind of orient you to the toolbar there. So we'll have a time for questions at the end. So if you have anything that comes up or any notes, feel free to chat those in right away. And we'll pick those up and answer those things at the end. We've also got a couple other webinars coming up, and you'll see those at the end. And there's an opportunity to give us some feedback on some of the surveys that will come out afterwards. So if you could complete those, that would be really helpful to us. But we'd like to go ahead and get started talking today about engaging museum audiences with social media. So I think today we'd like to talk about a few things. Our overview will be sort of defining social media and Web 2.0. So a little bit of background, what does that mean? What are we talking about in those situations? And then who is the audience of these things? So how do we see people and what demographics and age groups do we see using this online? Then we've got two different things we'd like to talk about. One is sort of social media engagement path. So we talk about how, what does it look like to start using social networking in your organization? How do you develop content and how do you draw people to that? And then how do you start engaging them through the properties that you set up? The second thing is to think a little bit about how do we encourage creativity. So what do people want to do using social networks? So how are people already out there associating, and how can your museum actually think about creating opportunities for that? That'd be really a next sort of step that you can think through. And we're going to talk around the idea of creativity and kind of engaging folks that way. So when we start, we talk about what is social media. So we've got a number of different options up here. We have Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Flickr, Delicious, WordPress, blogging. Social media is essentially a platform, and there's a variety of different ones. So Facebook for kind of friendships, Twitter for kind of updates and information, YouTube for video, Flickr for photos. That's allowing kind of everybody to get on board and start publishing content on the web, and then relating that to one another. So you have these kind of closed circles, these sort of social circles, that you're sharing your content with, whether that be video or photography or just things about your life. And that people are kind of having interactions rather than the same way that replacing the phone or email, that there's these kind of web-based platforms where people are starting to interact and talk about things. And it's marked by transparency and authenticity. It's much more relational, which is the social aspect of it. And it's really geared towards sort of trust and rating and borrowing this kind of information back and forth. So social media is kind of a wide, it means sort of this full range of everything from these platforms that we're talking about to also kind of the social aspects of rating, like sites like Yelp, where people are providing feedback and kind of borrowing that information. We want to take a little bit of step back and talk about what is this sort of shift from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0. And so Web 1.0, just to give a little history, is sort of from the beginning of the internet in the mid to late 90s to kind of about the early 2000s. And in this world, you have this kind of view that we see over here on the left, the kind of corporate website, and it's sort of pushing content out. And I think part of the reason you had this was there was a very high barrier to have people actually get online. So a corporation could afford a graphic designer and someone who knew how to do HTML and put content up there. And there weren't a lot of applications to make that happen. So there was a very high barrier to entry. And so content tended to be sort of centralized and authoritative, and it was pushed out to people. So there wasn't a lot of two-way communication that happened. What happens in Web 2.0 in the mid-2000s is that suddenly it's much easier for people to start getting online. So you have things like blogs. So now you can go to Blogger, and in 15 minutes, anybody could sign up and be publishing content to a specific URL about what's going on. So suddenly the barrier to entry has decreased dramatically. And then you have kind of the advanced in sort of content management systems, which are making it easy for people to publish their own content. And then you get things like YouTube and Flickr, which are allowing people to put video content up for the first time. So YouTube, for the first time allowed anyone to take any kind of video file and upload it and share it with their friends, and then take a URL and paste it. So they've both provided the platform to make that happen and for people to rate that content, but also to share that with people and to serve that up. They could put it on their own website. So I think what we're seeing here, which is kind of marked by the circles on the right, is that the corporate website has become a little less important, and we think less about the kind of website as a whole, though it certainly has a place and is has relevance and should not be discarded. But it's part of a kind of broader conversation. And so there's lots of channels that people are learning about your organization. And so today is a lot of thinking about, particularly we're going to talk about Facebook and Twitter for a fair amount of time, about how to use these channels, how to develop a presence in those, and how to use those to actually engage audiences. Because that's really what Web 2.0 is about. It's about relationships. It's about engaging in conversation. And it's a lot about transparency and authenticity, which we're going to be talking about. So when we take a look at kind of how different users and how are people using the internet online and who's doing what right now. So I think this is some data from the Pew Internet and American Life Project, taking a look at who are we reaching. So in terms of folks watching video, using social networking, reading blogs, you're seeing obviously this kind of 18 to 32-year-old crowd is using it a fair amount. But it's quickly followed by, kind of the under 45 crowd as well. So much more kind of in the video watching realm, but the social networking is much more towards the kind of younger crowd. But again, you're still seeing 35% of adults. These numbers are from 2007, and most recent report that came out at the beginning of this year saying, at the under 34 crowd, you've got about 75% of people, adults with social networking accounts, and many of them have multiple accounts that way to stay in touch with people. So we're seeing that kind of only increase over time. So I think even this data is a little bit a little old that way. But I think what you're seeing is that people are what the Pew study refers to as kind of multi-channel folks. That these are people that are using kind of a wide range of ways to communicate, whether that be social networking, whether that be commenting and creating blogs, whether it being using their cell phone. That these people are kind of highly mobile, highly interactive, and that we have a lot of folks kind of thinking about using this stuff. So when we're talking about kind of social media, I think a lot of what we're talking about is the younger crowd. And I think what's relevant here is in our work with museums, we hear a lot of anxiety around that. And I think we get some of that anxiety from the development people who say, we don't know how to connect with this new audience. We don't know how to make content that's relevant. We don't know how to, how to engage these folks. So there's a question about sustainability. So I think, thinking through how do we take someone from the 18 to 30-year-old and move them into something where they have an affinity for our organization, where they're a supporter, and where they're on board. So I think that's why engagement is important. And then we also, hear some from the kind of programming and how do we remain relevant from a missional point of view. How do people want to view content? What sorts of experiences do people want to have? And I think we'll talk about some of that today too. Now, while we saw some differences there, I think you'll see that there's actually, the Pew study pulled out that there's actually a fair amount of similarities where there's much less difference between kind of what people are doing. I think a couple of things are really noteworthy. One is email. So email is still extremely prevalent. So, and we see the same thing with search. So as much as we're going to talk about social media today, you can see almost everybody is using email. So it's still a far and away kind of huge channel to communicate. So, kind of some of that anxiety, is founded, but, it's nowhere near like social media has eclipsed email. If anything, email and search are far and beyond some of the data sets. 5 out of 10 people are using search every day, and 6 out of 10 people are using email every day, whereas only 1 out of 10 are using a social network every day. So, it's fourfold or fivefold the people that are using email and search compared to social media. So there's a lot of buzz about social media, but email and search are still very, very powerful ways to reach out to people. So that's a great point to kind of keep some perspective in the midst of all of this. So you have time to come up with a strategy. I think what's really relevant here is this kind of concept of downloading podcasts and videos. Actually, I'm really struck how low some of these numbers are. So while email is that way, and while you see kind of different demographics not using them, this concept of downloading is just not as relevant. This kind of concept of sharing things on the web is actually a lot more important. So we want to take a moment here and talk about, I think we have 2 ways that we're really going to sort of concepts we're going to talk about kind of engaging audiences with social media. And the first is this kind of create concept. So thinking about how we can use social networks to create a content stream that's compelling. So this is about creating your own property on a social network. So creating a Facebook group or page or a Twitter feed. How do you go about doing that? And how can you think about that? What kind of resources are required for that? And how do you move from just having content up there to actually engaging people? The second is inviting, what we call the invite approach, which is thinking about well, what are people already doing? What are people excited about doing online? What kinds of experiences do they want to have online and offline? And how do we get them to kind of create and comment about those? And how do we kind of get out there and kind of get folks talking about what we're doing as well? So kind of leveraging their sort of motivated desires. So let's start with approach one, sort of the creating content. So when we work with our clients, the way that we like to think about it is this kind of four-step process. We've grouped the first two together, which are the stages called gather and publish. And so from this, you've set up some sort of online property, whether that be a Facebook page or a Twitter feed. And your first step is to start to gather people. So how do you collect followers? How do you collect fans? And then the second is kind of how do you come up with a publishing strategy? So I think we see a lot of folks who are excited about it. They get out there and they get through this first stage, but kind of cresting into the next stage of this interaction, where people, you can actually start to see interaction happen. So both between the folks, the kind of fans on your page, or the followers of you, and with you as an institution. And I think getting from the kind of gather and publish stage to the interact stage is a big hurdle. And this is where I think we'll have some helpful things to say about how to kind of press through that. Once you get those interactions starting to happen, that's when you can sort of come from the other direction and think about how to join the discussion. And this is where the engagement happens. So you need to go through all three of these stages before you can sort of truly start to engage people online. And this is where you're having an online interaction and using this to kind of pull people through. So we'll come back to this at the end. I think we're going to step through each of these concepts to talk about how we go about doing these things and how you can think about them. So the first step before you even get to the pathway is to sign up. So this means on Facebook, you typically create a fan page or a group. And there's various reasons to pick one of those. We tend to recommend the fan page a little bit more over the group. And for Twitter, it means setting up for a Twitter account or a feed. So these are your kind of personal accounts or your organization's account where you can send out information. You can have different ones on different topics, different ones for different audiences. We're seeing a lot of diversification right now in Twitter for people having different streams. Here's just a screenshot just so you have a visual of a Facebook fan page. This is our fan page where we have our logo. We have a space where we're pulling in events like webinars that we're doing. We're pulling in imagery. We're pulling in things from our blog automatically. So we have some tools in place to get going. Now, we had a webinar yesterday, which we'll be running again, about sort of getting started with social media. I'm not going to go into too many details about how to get set up and things like that here. We're going to talk a little more strategic about this engagement question. But if anyone would like that information, please let us know. We'd be glad to get that for you, or you can watch. We'll probably run that one again